Okay, great. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to this Ignite webcast. My name is Josh Topau. I'm a program manager for Office 365. And Ignite events are a series of technical workshops for IT professionals and Microsoft partners. And the Ignite webcast series will address different technical subjects and scenarios that are really beneficial to anyone who wants to increase their knowledge of the Office 365 suite. So today we're really happy to have Brian Day as our presenter. Brian is a senior program manager from the Microsoft Exchange Customer Adoption Team. And in today's webcast, Brian will be discussing Exchange deployment and Coexistence. So today's session provides a really great opportunity to hear directly from a Microsoft employee and learn about some of the new features and releases for Office 365. And today's webcast will be about an hour, and we'll leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end to field questions from anyone on the call. So I ask that you hold your questions till that time, and I'll let you know when you can go ahead and type them into the chat box. So one last thing is that we are recording today's session, and you can find the recording and the PowerPoint presentation that Brian's going to be using on the original blog post, which you can find at that link that I just posted. So without further ado, Brian, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much, Josh. And can everybody hear my microphone okay? Just to make sure that we're not leaving people in the dust. All right, excellent, thanks. So it looks like a pretty good group of people that we've got here from all over the globe, so that's awesome. I'm really excited to help present this stuff to you guys. And I'm going to apologize up front if I'm not paying attention to the chat window over on the side, just because I'm sure it'll start moving about pretty quickly, and Josh will help make sure that anything that gets asked doesn't get missed. So we'll get started. We're going to talk about Exchange 2013 deployment and coexistence. We've also got some tips and tricks kind of sprinkled throughout to help you guys as you start to do deployments in your own on-premises locations, and some of the things to think about as you're moving through the environments. So, quick agenda, and then we'll get moving. We'll talk about some of the fundamentals of deployment itself, things you need to have in place for 2013 to be deployed in your environment, what the upgrade paths are from either Exchange 2007 or 2010, and what to expect during those transitions. And then we'll move on into, we'll touch lightly on public folder migrations. We won't get too deep there, and I'll explain why when it's coming up. A few tips and Q&A where I didn't know where they best fit in the presentation, kind of threw those in an extra slide at the end. So without further ado, let me make sure I got this going. So some of the things to make sure that are in place before Exchange Server 2013 can even be deployed in your environment. Right off the bat, and I'm sure a good number of you are already familiar with this, is that we're going to only support coexistence with the two versions of Exchange that came before 2013, one of those being 2010 and 2007. Each one of those is going to require a particular update level before you can deploy 2013. Exchange Server 2010 will require SP3, which was released a little while ago. In 2007, will require SP3 Rollup Update 10, and those will have to be installed on every server in the organization. You also see a note at the top there that says requires 2013 CU1. So we are going to require that in order to be in a supported coexistence model, you're actually going to have to run Exchange Server 2013 CU1. That is Cumulative Update 1. That is the new servicing mechanism we're using with 2013. In the past, you knew of rollup updates. We've changed those to cumulative updates now for 2013. The msexchangeteam.com site had a pretty good article on what that servicing change was a few weeks ago. Supported major clients, so any of the most recent 3 Outlook for Windows versions, 2013, 2010, and 2007. You will see that 2010 and 2007 have particular levels that they need to be at. You need to at least be on Service Pack 1 with the November 2012 public update or later for 2010. And 2007 requires SP3 also with the November 2012 public update or later. We do hope that customers continue to be proactive in applying those public updates and keeping up to date with all the things the Outlook team has put their hard work into fixing in the client. Quick note there is that one of the major architectural changes, and we'll touch lightly on architecture a little later, is that there is no more direct RPC connectivity to Exchange. All clients are going to now use Outlook Anywhere, essentially RPC over HTTPS, whether or not they're internal or external. You'll notice that Outlook 2003 is not listed. We will no longer be supporting Outlook 2003 with Exchange Server 2013. One of the major stumbling blocks for that is that Outlook 2003 does not support AutoDiscover, and AutoDiscover is a huge part of making sure that Outlook clients work in Exchange Server 2013. We do continue support for Entourage 2008 for Mac, as long as it's the Web Services Edition, as well as Outlook for Mac 2011, which I believe they just released Service Pack 3 recently. So you can go out and find that and install that. There's a lot of good fixes in there as well, but I do not believe we're going to be mandating a particular Service Pack level for Outlook for Mac 2011. Active Directory. There's nearly nothing here that's changed from Exchange Server 2010. We still require a 2003 Force functional level or higher. All the way up to Server 2012 is fine. And you still need at least one 2003 SP2 or later GCDC in every single Active Directory site that Exchange is installed. It's the same as our previous releases. Still no support for read-only DCs or read-only GCs. If you do have them in the same site as Exchange, we will ignore them. So they can commingle, they can be in there, but we just will not use them for any of our LDAP interactions with Active Directory. All the various namespace configurations for AD continue to be supported. I will call out, though, the single label domain. If you're not familiar with what an SLD is, you'll often see us use examples that just say contoso.com or fabricam.com in our mythical Active Directory environments. The single label domain would just be Contoso or Fabricam. It is supported, but we would suggest that customers continue to think of moving off and performing a forced migration to a non-SLD environment in the future, as we cannot guarantee that we will continue to support SLDs in future versions. OS, two options right now. So for 2013, you can deploy on either Server 2008 R2 SP1, or later if there are additional service packs to be released, or Server 2012. 2008 R2 really depends on what you're going to be doing with the server. Client Access Server, or I should say the Client Access Server role, could be installed on Standard or Enterprise Edition. Either one is perfectly fine. The Mailbox Server role, though, if it is going to be a member of a database availability group, still needs Enterprise Edition for 2008 R2 because of the need for Windows failover clustering. Talking about Server 2012, though, there's only two editions, Standard or Data Center. That is a change to the licensing model for 2012. Standard Edition is actually good for any Exchange Server 2013 role, because for the first time now, Windows Server Standard Edition comes with Windows failover clustering in 2012. So you can actually use one server SKU and use that for all of your 2013 deployments if you so choose. As usual, and you all probably expect this, there's a number of IIS components and other things that will be installed as Windows features on the boxes. .NET Framework 4.5 will be required. Windows Management Framework 3.0 and the UCMA 4.0 will also be required for 2013. The nice thing about installing on Server 2012, all three of those last things, two of the three last things are included out of the box. So .NET Framework and Windows Management Framework will already be up to date. There's also a handful, I believe it's 4 or 5 hot fixes that you would have to go track down, download, and install for 2008 R2 if you want to install 2013. Whereas Windows Server 2012, there are no hot fixes currently you need. You can just install on the base OS, the features, install and the feature list that you see here, as well as the other ones that will be installed for IIS. So it can be a much easier installation if you'd like to have that. So let's talk quickly about the functional layering. So many of you may have already seen this, some of you may have not. There's a major architectural shift that has taken place in Exchange Server 2013. So if we go back in time for a moment and just take a few seconds to look at Exchange Server 2010, there was always a Layer 7 hardware load balancer in front of Exchange Server 2010. Then we had our other 4 of them listed here. We had the Client Access Server role, the Hub Transport Server role, Unified Messaging, and Mailbox. There was also the Edge Transport role, which is obviously very similar to Hub Transport that is not mentioned here. What we have done is we have taken, there we go, and simplified things a bit. We've now changed things up to the fact where you don't need Layer 7 load balancing. You can actually get by with just TCP session affinity and nothing else. No source IP, no authentication header for ActiveSync, no SSL session IDs, no Exchange cookies. It doesn't even matter. Take the Layer 4 load balancer, pass the traffic through, maintain TCP session affinity, and that's it. That'll pass to our Client Access role. Client access role now in 2013 is only doing authentication, proxying, and redirect. That's it. It is not doing any rendering. It is not doing any of the work that you saw in the client access server role in 2010. Everything else has been moved on to the mailbox server role. So all of our protocols, our mailbox assistants, all the APIs you could tie into, store, content indexing, unified messaging, the actual transport services themselves, they're on mailbox. The best way you can think about this is mailbox is essentially like a multi-role 2010 server now. Client access is just going to take the traffic in, authenticate you, determine where your mailbox is currently mounted, and proxy the traffic through. It doesn't do anything else as far as the clients are concerned. It is also the point where our SMTP traffic flows through. So SMTP traffic would come in through the load balancer, hit your client access role, and then the what we call the front-end transport service, or FETS for short, that runs on client access would then determine where the best location to drop this message is and proxy that information back to mailbox. So I just want to cover that at a high level. We're going to be having a full architecture session later on. All right, so next up. So we're going to quickly run through just the upgrade scenarios from 2010 to 2013, and it'll be a very similar looking animated slide for 2007 to 2013. And then we'll go through each step in more detail. So starting off here, first thing we would do is deploy Service Pack 3 across the organization. We'd also be preparing the environment, and we'll get into all the different steps that those are. Oh, excuse me, the animation took a while to pop up there. You'll deploy your first 2013 CU1 servers, and we'll discuss why I say both of them. You'll be obtaining and deploying certificates. Now, the good news is that in a 2010-2013 environment, when we're coexisting, 2013 CAS is the only place you're going to have to put certificates as far as the major clients go. 2013 CAS will be proxying all of the traffic behind the scenes of 2010, so you will not have to export certificates, install those on the 2010 CAS, as you may have done during the 2010 and 2007 coexistence. All right. Primary namespace switch overnight. This is the night that everybody usually gets a little, their hands get clammy, they're nervous. You know, you got to make sure that everything's in place first. We switch over our DNS and make sure that all of our client traffic continues to flow as expected. And we'll go through some tips and tricks on that. And at that point, you can start building out your mailbox servers and moving mailboxes over. Now, I know this seems very, very, very high level. It is intended to be on this slide here, and we'll get into exactly what these steps get into. But really, the idea of this is to show you that this should feel rather similar. This is very similar to a 2007 to 2010 upgrade scenario in the past. So for the folks that are on the call that are using Exchange 2007, let's see, we'll go through the same kind of quick steps, and then we'll get into the details. So for those of you that are only on 2010, please bear with us for a moment. So again, very similar. We'll be deploying Service Pack 3 and Rollup Update 10 across the environment. What I will warn the 2007 administrators on the call is that we cannot check to make sure RU10 is installed in the servers. As you may have noticed in the past, and this goes all the way back to 2007, when you apply a Service Pack, we increment the version number in Active Directory. When you apply a Rollup Update, we don't. So because of the fact that we're requiring a roll-up update and there was not, say, a new service pack for 2007, it's kind of the honor system. So we can check that the SP3 is installed in 2007, and we can check to see if SP3 is installed in 2010, but it will be up to the administrator to make sure RU10 is installed across the environment. We will not block you if, let's say, you had Service Pack 3 but Rollup Update 8 installed in 2007. We can't check that, and we won't block the installation of 2013. But then you may start to see things don't work, and you have to make sure you go back and install RU10 everywhere. All right. Again, we deploy our CU1 servers. It's going to be both roles, mailbox and CAS, and we'll talk about why in a moment. Things start to get just a touch different here for 2007. You do need a legacy namespace, similar to the 2010-2007 coexistence deployment before. You do not need a legacy namespace for 2010, for those of you wondering why we didn't see it in the previous slide. Again, we'll get our certificates and deploy them. You will, in this case, have to export and import them to the 2007 CAS as well, due to the fact that we need the legacy namespace. Now, you certainly could use two different certs, one that only has legacy on it, and then the primary cert with all the other names, but we feel it is better to minimize the number of certificates in the environment. Again, we'll have our primary namespace switch overnight. We'll get into what that means. And then you can start building out your mailbox infrastructure, moving mailboxes. And once your internet-facing site is complete, you could then switch over and do your non-internet-facing sites. Oh, somebody just took over the presentation. Hold on a second, folks. We need to figure out what just happened here.
Right, I can go forward if you don't have control of it anymore. Or do you want to just try sharing it again, Brian?
Yeah, let me represent.
Okay, one sec. Thanks, everyone.
All right. All right, let me just get us back to where we were. Seven. All right, we're right at the last step there. So the last step would have been, once we finish upgrading our internet-facing sites, as always, we do internet-facing sites first. We then come back later and do all of our non-internet-facing sites. All right, so let's get a little more into detail. So let's go back and we're going to go through all steps for both versions, but each one will be combined in the slides. So I'll call out differences where it's different for 2007 or 2010. So step one, preparing. This should feel very similar as it did in the past for other deployments. We'll have our SP3 or SP3 RE10 deployed across the organization. We will extend our Active Directory schema for Exchange 2013 CU1. We will upgrade our Exchange organization to 2013 CU1, right? So this would be the setup/prepare AD step. If there is anybody that is on 2007 only right now, and you're not quite sure if you want to go to 2010 or 2013, I would advise you to be careful here. If you have 2007 only, and you decide, okay, I want to prep my environment for 2013, you can extend the schema. That would be fine. You can extend the schema, and that's okay. If you were to then go to the next step, which is the organization increase, so the setup/prepare AD or the setup/P for those that use the shorter versions, if you do that before there's ever been a 2010 server in your organization, you will never be able to deploy a 2010 server. So if you're not sure right now which version you want to go to, I would suggest you first deploy at least one multi-role 2010 server, so at least you have one in the environment. And then if you still choose to go to 2013, then you can continue where you left off. If you are positive that you'll never go to Exchange 2010 and you'll go right from 07 to 2013, you could do the prepare AD without getting yourself into trouble. After the prepare AD, we prepare our domains. So if you have a single forest environment, you'll prepare the single domain forest, you'll prepare the single domain. If you have a multiple domain forest, you could do them one at a time, or you could use the setup/prepare all domains switch if you'd like to do them all at once. Again, it's a good idea at the end here to make sure you validate that the system is working as expected before you do anything, right? We want to make sure everything is working as expected before we start making other changes. You can use the Microsoft Connectivity Analyzer. You can either go to www.exrca.com at the bottom there. There's also a new URL you can go to, which is testconnectivity@microsoft.com. And as always, there's the test connectivity commandlets in the Exchange Management Shell. So just a quick tip to make sure everything is working before going forward. And if we talk about the schema for a moment, obviously Exchange 2013 RTM is available for download. There are going to be schema changes in C1 though. So while you could go and get the schema for 2013 RTM and deploy that today, you will then have to do another schema update later for C1. So if you want to get it out of the way once and don't worry about filing multiple change requests in your environment, you may just want to wait for C1 to be deployed, then you can do the schema one time and not twice. All right, so deploying the first C1 servers. You do need to install both servers. So because our client access role only does the authentication, proxy, and redirect, there's no web rendering taking place there. Because there's no web rendering taking place, the new Exchange Administration Center is housed entirely on the mailbox server role. You require both roles to be able to manage the environment. So if you were to only install the 2013 mailbox server, you would not be able to log into the Exchange Administration Center. If you were able to only deploy the client access server 2013, you wouldn't have anywhere to really authenticate to because the mailbox server wouldn't exist yet. So you do need both roles to be able to manage Exchange Server 2013, but I want to call out, there's a note there, that in 2013 something that is new is we cannot change roles once they've been deployed. So let's say you deploy, I'll just do one multi-role server, and you're thinking later on I can take mailbox off of it, move that off later. You can no longer do that in 2013. So if you install just CAS, you would then have to uninstall Exchange and reinstall Exchange to do CAS and mailbox. If you did only mailbox, you'd have to uninstall the whole thing and reinstall CAS and mailbox if you wanted to have a multi-role server. At the bottom there, you'll notice there's a new parameter that I'm sure all of you will love. /I accept Exchange server license terms. This replaces our old method in the past where you used to have the press any key to, if you do not agree with the server EULA, that has been replaced with an interactive parameter now in setup. So you will have to actually type out or script that entire parameter for every single setup command that you run from the command line mode. In the GUI mode, there's the normal checkbox that says I accept with the EULA. The different roles, so you're only going to have 3 roles that you can choose from now: client access, mailbox, and management tools. There is no more installable GUI version of the management tools. So if you install the management tool role that you see here on, say, like an administrator's client machine, all you're really going to get is a shortcut to the Exchange Management Shell and then the toolbox that comes with 2013. There will not be an actual GUI management tool that is installed on the server. You'll log on to the Exchange Admin Center through your browser instead. All right, legacy namespace. Not too much to talk about here. We're going to get to client protocol flow in a moment, so then we can discuss where and how this is used. It is only needed for 2007 Coexistence. It is not needed for 2007, so take note, folks that are on 2007. This does need to be resolvable internally and externally if you have external client access. So you'll need to make sure that clients inside and outside can resolve the name. And there's the URL to the new version of the connectivity analyzer down there, testconnectivity.microsoft.com. We'll be using that again in multiple steps of the switch over. And just a quick note, it doesn't have to be called legacy. You can call it anything that you'd like to. We have a lot of customers that often say, oh, why did you pick the name legacy? Why are you forcing us to use that? But it can be any name that you want to. You can call it legacy, you can call it old mail, you can call it EX 2007. It is completely up to what you're comfortable in your environment using. Okay, on to certificates. There's a brand new end-to-end certificate wizard in Exchange Administration Center. So for those of you on 2007, I apologize for the PowerShell experience you had in that environment. I know it can be a little daunting. Things got a bit better in Exchange 2010, and we feel that we've made the certificate wizard in Exchange Server 2013 even better in EAC. So you will be able to go end-to-end entirely. What names do I want to have on my certificate? Excuse me, what's my primary name on the certificate going to be? We'll actually do an attempt at looking at your 2013 environment, seeing what all your virtual directories are configured as, and guessing what names you might want on the certificate. So we'll look at your OO virtual directory, we'll look at the ECP virtual directory, everything else, and we'll do our best guess and say, this looks like what you probably want for your environment, and then you can decide whether or not that is correct and modify the certificate request as necessary. It'll export the request file. You'll move that off to either your internal CA or an external CA, whatever your choice may be. And once you get the response back from the CA, you'll then be able to import that into the web page. And a fantastic new piece is that once that's in there, you'll actually be able to export that certificate with the private key and then import it to any CAS in your Exchange 2013 environment that you want to. So from one location on the web page, you can then import that certificate to all of your CAS if you want, if you prefer to do it that way. Also really cool in the EAC is if your certificates are nearing expiration, we'll start to warn you about 30 days out. When you log on as an admin, you're doing your work in EAC, you get a nice little warning right at the top. You've got a certificate about to expire. So that'll warn you that you should start to kick your certificate renewal process into gear, whatever it might be for your environment. And if you start to get closer and closer to expiration day, we will start to warn you more and more often. So you'll start to get that notice a lot more than just once per day. So more on certificates. We believe a smaller number of certificates with a larger amount of names is good. It makes it a lot easier to manage them in the environment, understand when they're going to expire, when you need to renew them, and it makes the actual process a lot more streamlined, we feel. We still are very big proponents on using split DNS within an environment. If you have not had yet a chance to work in an environment that utilizes split DNS, this simply means that if I were to ping mail.contoso.com from an internal machine, I might get address 192.168.110. Whereas if I go home for the day and I ping mail.contoso.com, I get a different IP address, 10.10.10.10, whatever it may be. So this way, when I'm inside, I might go directly to a load balancer. When I'm at home, I might go through our reverse proxy in a perimeter network and then hit the Exchange infrastructure that way. There's no reason to list machine names on the certificates. There's a lot of misconceptions in the past that you had to have your client access server names on all the certificates, and that just wasn't true. So usually this comes up if somebody's forgotten to modify the Exchange Web Services directory or the offline address book download URLs. You might get certificate pop-ups when your clients try to download the OAB if it's using SSL. We're trying to get free busy information or auto-discover. And as long as all of the virtual directory names and the auto-discover names have been configured correctly to use the load balance name, you will never have to put a client access server name on a certificate or a mailbox server name on a certificate. And as mentioned previously, subject alternative name certificates, the certificate that has more than one name on it, that is typically what we find is the best way to go. All right, switching over in the namespace. So what can we do beforehand? What do we do during? Again, just make sure that the legacy namespace works. Even though you might be able to create it quickly, it's a good idea to maybe have a few of your employees that use different ISPs at home. Just go home and try to do an NS lookup. Does that name appear to have propagated out to the internet? Can we look it up successfully? Because if we can't, well, if you're in 2007 and you can't resolve the legacy namespace from outside, your migration is not going to go very smoothly. A load balancing. So as mentioned before, for 2013, we no longer require layer 7 load balancers. Now, there are definitely times where it makes sense, and you might want to use them, depending on your environment. But for all practical purposes, all you need now is TCP session affinity, and that's it. And really, TCP session affinity is essentially no affinity, because every load balancer will maintain that a single TCP conversation continues to go to the same place until that conversation is terminated. For your legacy namespace, you will have to keep whatever load balancing mechanism you have in place there. So if you're using a layer 7 load balancer for Exchange 2007, leave that in place because we will utilize that for your legacy URL until you've moved everybody off to 2013. Auto-discover, as mentioned on the previous slide, we want to make sure that your SCP URL, the auto-discover service internal URI, for all of your 2013 CAS has been configured to a load balance value, so it is not the fully qualified domain name of the server any longer. And if you need to, configure the auto-discover site scope for all of your 2013 CAS to make sure that they cover all of the user sites in Active Directory that have users that are appropriate for your deployment. Continuing on. Lower TTLs. So one place I see people get messed up a little bit is when they're doing a deployment, if their deployment requires that the IP address is going to change on a name. It is a good idea to make sure that you're using a very low TTL in those DNS records and have that set well in advance. You want to set these low, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with, but not 24 hours, not 48 hours. And you want to make sure that this is done at least a couple days in advance so that the internet has propagated those changes out. You really should create your external publishing rules for legacy in advance. They can just kind of sit there dormant because nobody's going to be accessing them until you've actually started doing the switchover. Eventually, we're starting to transition into actually doing the work on switchover night. So we'll update our internal and external DNS records. We'll move our, in this example, mail.contoso.com and autodiscover.contoso.com records to point to CAS 2013. At this point, you can update your publishing rules to point to the 2013 servers. And there's going to be an Outlook Anywhere switch and an animation coming up on that, so we'll discuss when we get to it. Also not mentioned here, but for those using Exchange 2007, when you do the switchover, you're also going to have to change all your virtual directory names. So if all of your virtual directory names today are mail.contoso.com or oa.contoso.com, whatever it might be, you'll have to update your virtual directory names to respect the legacy namespace that you've chosen. I usually recommend you have a couple of PowerShell scripts handy. One that you run that changes them all to legacy, and one that you run that changes them all back to what they were before, just in case you find a reason that you have to roll back your migration attempt. Just makes it a lot easier to have it in a script in advance so that you don't have human error during the heated moment when you need to switch things back if you do. Okay, so let's take a look at a few scenarios on once you've moved the namespace over to 2013, what to expect. So in this example here, we have 2010, and then we'll have a 2007 example coming up after. So in this example here, you see we have our load balancer under mail.contoso.com. It says layer 4 there, but really we're only using TCP session affinity, and that's it. So a HTTPS request comes in for OA. It hits IIS on the Exchange 2013 CAS. And before we go any further, I will mention that we are still allowing you to either do the multi-role or single-role servers. We are probably going to be leaning towards suggesting multi-role for the majority of customers, but if you want, you can still split them out. And this chart here is not saying multi-role or single-role is better than the other. We're just showing the protocol flow. So the connection comes in. It hits IIS on the 2013 CAS. We can see that the user's mailbox is mounted on a 2010 mailbox server in the lower left-hand side with a little people icon. The traffic will then be proxied across to a 2010 CAS, and the 2010 CAS will use RPC to get into store, just as it would in the past. So really, not much of a difference here. This is pretty much what you'd expect in a similar, maybe a cross-site proxy redirect request of years before. This is all internal in one site, though. So let's add a second site. So now we have an OA request come in. It hits IIS on 2013 CAS. You can see the mailbox has now been moved over to the right-hand side. It is a non-internet facing site because we do not have a load balancer or an external URL populated. And we will simply HTTPS proxy across to the non-internet facing site and let the 2010 CAS use RPC to get to the database. So very similar, whether it is an in-site or cross-site proxy request for 2013 and 2010, it's the same flow. It just might cross a site boundary. Change things up a little bit. We will now make it an internet-facing site. So once again, the OA request comes in. We hit IIS. Now the 2013 server says, ooh, I see that there is an external URL populated for that site. I'm going to issue a redirect, in this case, to europe.mail.contoso.com. We're going to hit the layer 7 load balancer in front of 2010 because there's no 2013 over there yet. And then let the 2010 CAS send via RPC down to store. So that would be a cross-site redirect request. When there is a cross-site redirect request like this, we're going from one site to another, you should anticipate that your users in OA will have to log on a second time because there is no cross-site single sign-on in this kind of scenario. So 2007 users, similar with a few twists. OA request will come into mail.contoso.com, still hitting our TCP session affinity load balancer. Hits IIS. Again, we can see the mailbox is mounted in the lower left-hand side, but is now 2007 mailbox. We see that we have a legacy.contoso.com namespace, and that is hitting a layer 7 load balancer. we will issue a redirect to legacy.contoso.com. The difference here from 2010 being this is in the same AD site. So even though in the same AD site for a 2007 user, we will issue a redirect. Also, if you're using forms-based authentication here, this will require a second logon. So you will not have a single sign-on redirect in this situation here if you're using forms-based authentication. Traffic flows down to 2007 CAS, flows down to 2007 mailbox. Now, let's add our non-internet facing site in and take a look. Again, OA comes into IIS, hits 2013 CAS. We can see that there is a mailbox mounted in the non-internet facing site in the far right-hand corner. We see, okay, now we need to do a redirect, but the redirect is going to go to legacy again because the 2007 user. So we get redirected to legacy.contoso.com. Once again, the user logs in a second time. They hit 2007 CAS. 2007 CAS proxies over to 2007 CAS in the non-internet facing site. And then the traffic moves down to store. So slightly different. We still have a redirect, but then we still are doing site-to-site CAS proxying just via 2007. All right, so internet-facing site, just like our previous example of 2010. Connection comes in. Mailbox is mounted in the new internet-facing site, europe.mail.contoso.com. Once again, we will issue a redirect, but this time to europe.mail.contoso.com. We hit our layer 7 load balancer, go through CAS, and hit store. All right, so let's talk Outlook Anywhere for a moment. So Outlook Anywhere, assuming that you're using it, probably looks something similar to this before you've introduced 2013. So this could be 2007 or 2010, really doesn't matter either way. Clients could be hitting mail.contoso.com. They come in, they do their RPC or HTTP proxy, hitting a CAS in either an internet-facing site, which then proxies over to a mailbox in the non-internet-facing site if necessary. And we have right now, we've got client auth and IIS auth set to basic on the CAS that has OA enabled. So one of the first things that we're going to have to do is drop our 2013 CU1 servers into place. And Outlook Anywhere is going to be enabled there. The next thing that we need to do is we actually have to enable Outlook Anywhere in all of our legacy CAS. And this is because when 2013 takes the traffic in, it is going to proxy it to the /RPC virtual directory on the CAS and the site the user's mailbox is mounted in. So we need to have OA enabled for that to work. We're also going to enable NTLM as far as the IIS authentication method. This is going to allow us to do system authentication between the Exchange servers. So in that non-internet facing site, you can see I've just enabled Outlook Anywhere, and I told it to use NTLM as far as the authentication setting. I'm also going to go back, and I'm going to add NTLM as one of the IIS auth methods on the CAS that already had Outlook Anywhere enabled. Okay, so now we've got OA enabled on all of our legacy CAS, and we've got NTLM as one of the available IIS authentication methods on all of those CAS. And then there's no change in the graphic here, but what we also need to do is make sure the Outlook Anywhere host name on all of our legacy CAS point to the 2013 CAS. So we're not going to set these to say legacy.contoso.com. We're going to set these to say mail.contoso.com. Then on DNS cutover night, right, as mentioned again, low TTL a couple days in advance, but we're going to switch our DNS records over, and then we're going to see mail.contoso.com point to the load balancer in front of 2013. 2013 CAS will take in those RPC over HTTP requests and proxy those off to the appropriate CAS. And as you can see here, the 2013 CAS is proxying off to either of the legacy CAS that have Outlook Anywhere enabled internally. Utilizing NTLM authentication, those requests will then go down to the 2007 or 2010 mailbox and be able to do whatever the client was asking. All right, now here's an eye chart. We'll put the slide up for 5 seconds and test all of you at the end. Just kidding. You could take a look at this when Josh posts the deck later on. But what we just are trying to show here is that depending on where the user's mailbox is and where they're accessing for namespace, what the expected client flow is going to be. So on the left-hand side, we have a 2007 user accessing a 2010 namespace. Right, so this would be like a 2007, 2010 coexistence. You can see everything that would happen there. And then as we move to the right, we have a 2007 user hitting a 2013 namespace, and then a 2010 user hitting a 2013 namespace. You can notice on the far right-hand side, those of you that upgraded to Exchange 2010 are going to kind of get the best of all worlds. We'll mostly be proxying traffic back to CAS 2010, whereas for a 2007 user, there's a couple spots where there may be a redirect. Also, it is not a typo for ActiveSync where it says proxy to mailbox 2013. That is correct. The 2007 user's ActiveSync will go 2013 CAS to 2013 mailbox, back to 2007 CAS, and then finally to 2007 mailbox. So that one is slightly different than a 2010 ActiveSync user. All right, moving mailboxes. Quick note here. So there's a new migration service in the on-premises bits that did not exist previously. So this was an Office 365 feature that we brought down to the on-prem bits where you can now schedule migration batches. So if you want to move all the IT people at once, you could easily do that. If you want to move all the sales people at once, you can easily do that. And the batch migration will go off. It'll actually attempt to retry a failed move if you want it to. It'll give you reporting at a batch level. So if you want to come back the next day and say, hey, those 500 people that I moved, just give me a report on those 500 moves, how many succeeded, how many failed, why did the failed ones fail, did they fail their retries, etc. So that's something that we're rather proud that we've brought to the on-premises bits that we did not have in previous releases. Public folders and manageability. I'm going to go kind of light on this because we have a lot of content coming out very soon on public folder migrations. Public folders, if you haven't seen already, have been entirely re-architected. There is no more public folder database. There is no more public folder replication. Yet the end user experience doesn't change at all. They still go into Outlook and they still go to the folders tab and they still see all their folders like they would in the past. Public folders now live inside what we call a public folder mailbox. So it's a new mailbox type in 2013. And you can put one or multiple public folders inside that mailbox, depending on how you want them placed within your organization. 2013 users can access a 2013 public folder or a 2007 or 2010 public folder, which we call the legacy public folders. It does not work the other way around, though. A 2007 or 2010 user cannot access 2013 public folders. So what this means is that you really need to have all of your users on 2013 before you do the public folder migration. The public folder migration is also a cutover. There is no incremental moving of public folders. There's going to be a process by which you do a complete cutover migration from the legacy public folders to the modern public folders. In the background, we're essentially using online mailbox moves to get the content from one location to another. So when you are doing these synchronizations, from legacy to modern public folders, your users can continue to use the legacy public folders while we're copying the data over. At a high level, there's really three major components that take place during the public folder migration. There's an analysis that takes place. You take a look at what you have in your Exchange 2007 or 10 public folders, who has access to what, how many items, how large are they. We help you out. We're going to be publishing some scripts in the near future to help you then kind of map out what we think your public folder mailboxes should look like. You'll create those public folder mailboxes and then start syncing data from the legacy system to the 2013 system. You can do delta syncs. So if it's been a long time since your initial sync took place, you can come back and do a delta sync to shorten the window of time the final step is going to take. The final step being the switchover. This is the night where you will flip the big red lever and switch your hierarchy from being on 2007 or 10 over to 2013. There is a downtime required here. Users will not be able to access public folders while that takes place. And this is why we want the sync to be as small as possible, because we do a final delta sync at this point as well. And if for some reason down the road you realize, oh, we did something really poorly with this migration, we really need to go back for some reason, you can switch back to the legacy public folders, but any changes that took place while you were in 2013 will not be copied back. You would have to manually export that data to like a PST and then import it. Coexistence. What's really awesome about EAC is we now allow you to manage not just 2013 mailboxes, but a vast amount of things on 2007 and 10 mailboxes as well. There's still a few limitations. We'll ask you to go back and use the legacy tools to manage those, and that also includes creating new mailboxes in the old system. So if you're coexisting with 2007 or 2010, or maybe you have all three versions, 7, 10, and 13 in the same environment, which is fine. If you need to create new legacy mailboxes, we would ask that you go back and use the appropriate management tool for that version of Exchange. Otherwise, you could use EAC. What's also really nice is that since 2010 allowed you to install both the 07 and the 10 management tools in the same box, and with EAC being all web-based, you can now manage all three versions from one administrator machine. So a few other little tips here, and then we'll open up the Q&A. Looks like we're going to be just a couple minutes over, and that's fine. There's a situation that can occur when you install your first 2013 servers. We want to make sure you customers are aware of this. When 2013 is installed, a new default offline address book is created in the environment. When this happens, all of your users will see this new offline address book as the default. And what will they do? They will try to download it. So in an organization like Microsoft, where our OAB is many hundreds of megabytes large, this could be quite a significant amount of data being transferred. So what can you do to avoid this? Prior to installing your 2013 servers, what we're going to tell you to do is go to, I believe it is the Client Settings tab of your mailbox databases, or you can use PowerShell, either is fine, and set whatever your current default OAB is to be the default OAB of that database. The database defaults override the global default. So what this means is when the 2013 OAB is created, you will have already defined your current 2007 or 2010 offline address book as the default for all of your users in the org. They will continue to only download the incremental changes for their OAB. Once you start moving the mailboxes to 2013, then they will start to use the new offline address book. So you'll have a much more controlled distribution of that new address book. Mailbox size increases. In the past versions of Exchange, we realized that we weren't doing an extremely good job of identifying exactly how much space within a database mailboxes were using for space. So even though they may have been only using 10 gigs of space as far as message sizes appeared, we were finding that they were using 12, 13, maybe even 14 gigs of space in the database, thereby making it harder for the administrators to truly deploy the proper amount of storage. So what you're going to find is that as you move mailboxes from 2007, 10 over to 13, you may see that their reported mailbox size increases. And this is on purpose. This is because we're actually doing a much better job of reporting all the content in that mailbox and how much space it is using. So what does this mean for you guys? If you have users that are, say, over about 70% of their quota, I think 72-ish% is the rule of thumb, you might find that when you move their mailbox, they suddenly can't send it because Exchange is going to say they're over their quota. The rule of thumb we're going to be pushing is roughly, we think, 30% or so is what you can expect to see. Some users may have less, some users may have more growth, depending on the types of content in their mailbox. But if you move a user over, you can expect to see about a 30% growth in their quota report. So you want to make sure that if you see anybody that close right now, before you move them, think about increasing their quota a bit so that they don't hit a send-receive limit as soon as you move them over. SMTP mail flow, completely up to you guys. So whenever you want to move over your MX records, you could do this at the beginning, you could do this at the end, or what's probably the most correct as far as an efficiency standpoint goes, once you have more than 50% of your users on 2013, then you could start to move your MX records to point over at 2013. Again, just a quick note, prep once using the CU1 bits. So instead of going and doing your schema today with 2013 RPM, just hang out and wait for the CU1 bits to be made available in the not too distant future and do the schema extension once. Get used to new testconnectivity.microsoft.com. Lots of cool new stuff going on there. We can still do the Exchange connectivity tests from the past. There's some link tests. There's some Office 365 tests. And we actually let you now download a small version of the client to run locally so that you're not just testing from the outside in. You can test from the inside out if necessary. And finally, for those of you that are using TMG or UAG today, Greg Taylor did post an article on the Exchange Team blog site a couple of months ago that shows you what the small tweaks you have to make in TMG or UAG to be able to securely publish Exchange 2013. So just a couple changes. The logoff URL is new in 2013, and there's some work you have to do if you want to get the Office apps with Outlook 2013 to be able to work through TMG. So I think with that, we'll open it up for questions, Josh, if that's okay, in the last few minutes.
Yeah, sounds great. Great presentation.